that was actually the day I met Saban. I had never met Coach Saban before, and he was there. And a source had actually told me that recruits were he was FaceTiming recruits from the Oval Office. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah. So I asked him at the Six, I was like, did you call any recruits while you were inside? And he kind of looked at me like, how do you know that?
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan, and on today's episode, we welcome Kaitlan Collins from CNN. She's an Alabama fan, diehard Crimson Tide fan, went to the University of Alabama. You're going to hear a lot more about what she thinks about this season, but also just talk a little bit about what's happening in Tuscaloosa and Washington, for that matter. I'm also here with Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. What happened? So Alabama goes into Norman with 2 losses, but everything is on the table, right? Alabama has the college football playoff potentially. They've got the SEC championship right there in front of them. All they have to do is go into Norman and beat a middling Oklahoma team, a team that's 1-5 in the SEC, struggling all season. Their one SEC win is when Auburn gift wrapped them a game in Jordan-Hare Stadium earlier this season. So this is not a good team, a team that doesn't even have a wide receiver on the offense pretty much, and they're just going to run the ball, which is essentially like a high school offense Alabama has to defend, and Alabama can't stop them. And worse, Alabama's high-powered offense, led by Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan, and obviously a super talented quarterback like Jalen Milroe and all the weapons he has at his disposal, they put up 3 points. What in the world? We can talk about the context here, Matt, and things happened and there were turnovers and all sorts of stuff. But this is a disastrous loss. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, for all the reasons you just mentioned, individually, as a game, one of the worst performances we've seen from an Alabama football team in the last 20 years. I would say on top of that, the context outside of the game, the context within the season, one of the worst times to have your worst performance of the season. It's baffling, and I would say that the legacy of this team at this point, and look, we can get into the however slim chance of things happening in Alabama's favor that could get them into the playoff at this point if you want. I don't even know if that's worth a discussion. But the truth is, I think to some degree the legacy of this team is cemented with this game. Now, the Iron Bowl can still alter that in some small direction, but I think what the 2024 Alabama Crimson Tide will be looked back on as is a team that is so difficult to put an easy to understand narrative on. They're not a team that got worse. They're not a team that got better. They are a team that was capable of spectacular highs and devastating lows. And there was no real apparent single factor you can point to that created those conditions. It's just a team that I think is going to take an entire offseason for this coaching staff and for the players who are returning to understand why they were this inconsistent, why they were capable of such wild swings from positive to negative. Because if they don't figure it out, this kind of play, this kind of wild swing is not going to be acceptable, and it is not going to lead to a long tenure for this coaching staff at Alabama.
No, listen, this team has had unbelievable ups and downs this year, like more extreme versions of that than I can remember watching, like in my lifetime. But You're right. In like the last couple of decades, certainly, from the Saban era on, this has got to be the worst loss that I can remember seeing. Like, just considering everything that was still on the table and what all was left for Alabama to do. And, who knows really the reason why Alabama played the way that they did. I mean, Oklahoma was a big reason. They came to play. They competed. They made the tackles. They stopped Jalen Milroe, and they ran the ball well. So credit to them, right? And but I mean, from a talent standpoint, I mean, Alabama was better than Oklahoma going into this game. They weren't facing nearly the amount of like injuries and other intangible things that Oklahoma was. I mean, Alabama loses Deontay Lawson in the game, and that's obviously an enormous loss, like in that game and moving forward. But you would think Alabama still has what they need to not only compete but to win a game like that again against a team that is going to be bowl eligible, is again like almost winless in the SEC, and you're talking about being like one of the representatives of the conference in the conference championship, right? And then playing in the college football playoffs. So everybody knew what the stakes were, and you have to wonder, I mean, were the lights too big, right? Were they looking ahead? Were they looking ahead to the Iron Bowl? Were they looking ahead to the SEC championship and even potentially the playoff? And why wasn't the message, hey, we got to beat Oklahoma? Oklahoma is the next game on the schedule. You can forget about all the tiebreaker scenarios. You can forget about that conversation that we had on this show, and idiots like us say, week day to day and week to week, does Alabama want to be in the conference championship game, or do they want to go in as an at-large 10-2 team? Everybody forgot you got to play Oklahoma, and anybody can beat you on a Saturday. Alabama is obviously not a perfect team. This is not a Nick Saban coach team that is going to dominate everybody. And Alabama lost to Vandy. They lost to Tennessee, both games on the road. So why wouldn't Oklahoma give them a tough game? Because it's on the road in Alabama. There's precedent for Alabama losing games like that. So I didn't think we would see it in the fashion that they did necessarily, but a loss was possible. I just didn't think it would look like that. It was terrible.
No, and I mean, I think it is a little bit comparable to the Vanderbilt performance because, you think back on that game, Alabama's defense seemed totally inept. They could not stop what was a fairly one-dimensional attack. The offense not only did they not seem to have any answers that would work, that could consistently move the ball, but Jalen Milroe made some spectacularly bad decisions in those games, and he did it again against Oklahoma. It's hard again, part of why my initial assessment of this is, Ben, it would be easier to understand and take this and process it if the LSU and Georgia games had not happened. That's what makes it so confusing. I can't just sit here and tell you this is who this team is. It's not, because they were completely dominant against LSU. They were incredibly good against Georgia for a half and then for a little bit at the end of the game. They are capable of being a great football team. And that's what's so confusing. It doesn't square with what we've seen in the losses. I mean, look, let's kind of exclude the Tennessee game, because that's a good team and Alabama was competitive in that game and had a chance to win that game. They didn't have a chance to win the Oklahoma or the Vanderbilt games. They got beat, straight up beat in those games. They were not competitive in those games.
24-point loss.
Yeah,
24 points.
I think that what is so hard to understand is how, and I'd love to hear it from somebody who understands the sport of football better than me, and there's lots of people who do. It's hard to understand how a team that is capable of being so good can have a game where they look so unprepared, and unprepared is just part of it, because I don't even think it's totally fair to put it entirely on the coaching staff, although they deserve the majority of the blame here. It's the million poor executions, the bad decisions. It really is like every single person involved in the organization suddenly forgot how good they were 2 weeks ago against LSU. And I don't have context for that I can look at it and say, this is how this happens. I don't get it. And they're going to have, again, like I said, they're going to have to square this and figure this out and find a way to prevent this kind of thing from happening. It is not just a one-time thing anymore. It is a trend.
Well, there are big picture conversations that we can have about this. We've talked about how Alabama fans need to get used to this again, right? Like we're 17 years removed from the Shula era.
I'll tell you, they don't. I don't think they need to get used to it, Ben. They're not going to. That's the main thing. Alabama, the standard is what it is, and it can slip a little bit.
The standard changes, though. It changes.
The standard changes a little bit, but I'll tell you this: the reason Alabama football is Alabama football in 2024 is the same reason that it was in 1979 and 1999 and 2010 and all of it, right? Alabama is not good over the course of 100 years by accident. And I know a lot of people want to say it's just Alabama is who they are for pure luck because they happened to hire Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, two of the greatest coaches of all time. It's not a coincidence that they hired those two guys. Alabama fans have, some would say, an impossibly high standard for success. And what it really means is they do not tolerate success below a certain threshold. And I don't think that's going to change. I think the threshold that they will tolerate is not moving. I think that maybe their expectation for success can move a little bit, but at a certain point, you're not going to be around long enough to shift Alabama fans' expectations so low that they will tolerate a standard less than regularly competing for championships. They'll just get rid of you and find somebody who can meet that standard.
Yeah, but how many people do you hire and get rid of until they meet that standard? That's what I'm. That's what I mean about.
They'll do it until they find somebody.
But see, that's what I mean about the standard changes, just in terms of winning becomes precious during some coaches' eras, right? Like it was for Shula, where every win really mattered. Like you were kind of hoping, oh boy, I hope they win this game, instead of I expect to win this game and win by a lot, right?
Sure,
you're right.
Happens.
The standard doesn't. You're right. The standard doesn't change in the sense that this is a program that has tradition and expectations. They want to win championships. You're right. That's always going to be there, and they will hire somebody until they get that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, between Bear Bryant and Gene Stallings, let's say, but then between Gene Stallings and Nick Saban, it took a while to get there, right? Sure. Many years, and they'll take as long as they need to. They'll take as long as they need to, and whether or not that's DeBoer, it's again, like we get back to that same conversation. It's unfair to judge him in his tenure at Alabama. Now the season's not even over yet, but if you want to continue that winning tradition quickly, then you got to think quickly. Like if you're unsatisfied and you get the impression, and we've seen programs act much quicker than Alabama probably will with DeBoer, right? If you're not meeting their standard for success, things can happen. Again, we've talked about it. The walls begin to close in. The chatter begins to start. The media, the national media narrative is what it is. And like you can try to ignore all that and close all of that off. But in the end, I mean, Alabama are the culture, the program, the trustees. They are the ones who want the championships, right? And they are going to get them by any means necessary. It might take a while, but they will always get back to that standard at some point. We've seen the cycle for like time and time again since we were alive and well before we even knew what Alabama football was. It's not
a fun process, but it's what's going to happen because that's the culture at Alabama. And I'll say, look, at the risk of sounding like I'm throwing a hot take out there, in the 12-team playoff era, Alabama not making the playoffs is considered an abject failure. It just is. And I don't think you get more than one of them. I really don't. Alabama fans are going to be sitting at home this year, and they're going to watch programs that they have nothing but disdain for, total lack of respect for, in the playoffs while they're not in it. They're going to watch Indiana football play in the playoffs. They're going to watch maybe somebody like South Carolina in the playoffs while they're at home or they're in the Cheez-It Bowl. You do not get more than one of those.
The Birmingham Biscuit Bowl.
I'll put it out there right now. Kalen DeBoer will not be the coach if he does not have his team in the playoffs in his first two seasons. It will be over.
Yeah, we don't normally partake in hot take. I don't think.
I'm willing to throw that one out there.
Well, look, you're probably right at this point because we had people like Paul Feinbaum come on this show, right? And he said it everywhere on ESPN, his show everywhere. And he said, playoff or bust this season for Kalen DeBoer. We've had other people out there saying, this could be the most talented team that he has while he's coach at Alabama, right? I don't know if that's true. Like you have to see it through in the sense that Kalen DeBoer needs his own guys in there. He needs to install his system, right? But again, like as we've talked about on the show, Kalen DeBoer was an outsider, right? In the eyes of a lot of people. And if he didn't win now, and if he doesn't win next year, people's patience, which was already thin, is going to implode. It just will. And we're getting too far ahead of ourselves, I think, because again, an Iron Bowl win could change how we feel about this, right? And going into next year, if he has a strong recruiting class, for instance, then they've got momentum and Kalen DeBoer is settling in and it's becoming his program, then maybe things change. But you're right, Matt. I mean, I think like if we're just talking about this week, the Oklahoma week, he was in the playoff. He basically had the playoff right there in front of him, and Alabama blew it. They blew it. Like there's no other way to put it. Oklahoma, respect to them. They're a good team, and Brent Venables deserves a lot of credit, right? Because he confused Nick Saban offenses that were high-powered. Guys like Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, they struggled against Brent Venables' defenses, so there was no reason not to think that he could throw some things at Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe and give them trouble, and they did. But I mean, this team was not as good as Alabama, obviously on paper, but based on the sample size that we've seen in 2024 so far, Alabama, they've got to win these games, but compared to what some other people have to do to get into the playoff for the remainder of the season, the order wasn't quite as tall. And so they had the college football playoff and the SEC championship within their grasp, and they threw it away.
As you said, to quote Robert De Niro from Copland,
give it to me.
You blew it.
They did. Well, let me ask you this last thing here, Matt, because Jalen Milroe, he's such a complex figure at this point in Alabama football history, right? He's a 2-year starter. He played for Saban. Now he's played for DeBoer. You talk about ups and downs, right? I mean, this guy's highs are as high as anybody has ever had them in Alabama history. You look at that Auburn game last year. You look at those 2 LSU games. Unbelievable performances from this guy. Like he's an Alabama legend in some respects, but the lows are very low, right? And especially this year, these 3 losses are tough. This game, really tough for Jalen Milroe. I mean, he played hard. He kept competing. These guys played hard around him. The pick 6 was tough, obviously, because, you had Kobe Prentice miss a block, and he took the blame on social media for that. The other one was a strip sack that turned into an interception. But it is what it is. I mean, the guy still walks away with 3 interceptions, no matter what. He's 11 of 26 for 164 yards, 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. Alabama doesn't score a touchdown. They lose the game. But right now, I mean, depending on what happens with Auburn this week, how are we looking at Jalen Milroe right now? Like, I don't know that we need to have like the big legacy discussion necessarily, but I mean, if he walks away with a win against Auburn, it's obviously better, and people look at him in a favorable light no matter what. And I think that they should, because this is a likable guy. He's delivered some legendary moments for Alabama, but people have been pretty hard on him the last 48 hours.
Well, it's tough because, and I want to say this, I want to be very nuanced about this. The quarterback is not solely responsible for the success or failure of a team, but in a lot of ways, the Alabama's personality as a team this season is very parallel to Jalen Milroe's. And I don't think, again, I'm not saying that it's Jalen Milroe's fault whenever they lose and it's all him when they win. It's just that it's worked in parallel to that. And I think when Alabama has had their 2 worst games of the season, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, and to some extent the loss to Tennessee, it lines up with games when I don't think Jalen Milroe played very good football. I think it is his inconsistency has really mirrored Alabama's inconsistency as a team. Now, Jalen Milroe doesn't play defense. That kind of stuff is an entirely separate deal. It makes you wonder whether there is a problem that runs through the entire building that is affecting Jalen Milroe in the same way that it affects the entire team. But that said, I think the impression that the fan base will have of him is very similar to the impression they'll have of this team overall, which is that he came out of the gate with such incredible potential and talent, and we see what he's capable of doing. And that makes it all the more frustrating when he has these games where he just doesn't seem like he could do anything right, where his brilliance and his athleticism suddenly go away and are replaced by baffling decision-making, poor execution. It is a very strange personality to have as either a player or a team. I think there probably are lots of other teams and lots of other players who have had this kind of story. Alabama fans are not used to seeing it. We don't see it in Tuscaloosa very often.
No, and listen, I mean, to be fair, watching the game after the pick six, my thought was, you got to take him out of the game now. Like he's struggling. It's not his night, right?
We've said that about a number of games with Jalen
right.
Milroe, and I just think they don't have another option they feel comfortable about.
Maybe
doing.
not.
But it may have been what was best for Jalen Milroe in the moment if they could have done it.
Right, but Milroe is also your best chance to win a lot of the time too, right? I mean, like with what he can do with his legs, he's obviously a great downfield thrower, and he had plays in this game, right? He made some incredible throws in the game, like early on, right? When Alabama thought they scored a touchdown, and Ryan Williams just happens to step out of bounds.
They did, and they covered up play. I mean, where Alabama did score a touchdown, and it was incorrectly
unbelievable throw.
A great throw, yeah.
An unbelievable play by Ryan Williams. I feel worse for Ryan Williams because, I mean, that dude just made one of the plays of the year, and you just take it away from him. And Alabama probably isn't winning the game, even if he scores. So. But, I mean, like, you're taking away the only shot that they have left in the game. But, look, I mean, they lose 21-3. I mean, like, there's not much else here. 24-3, I should say. There's not much else that you can really say when you lose by 21 points. But Milroe's interesting. I mean, he's got an opportunity to make a statement, you know, in this Auburn game, like, and this team does too. But, you know, you've seen momentum before, and you've seen what it can do to teams. Auburn has a lot of it. Alabama lost a lot of it, right? Auburn's playing for a bowl game, and, you know, Alabama fans are probably going to laugh about that, but they want to beat Alabama. They know they're going to beat Alabama every time that they play them, even if they don't. That's the mentality that team brings to the Iron Bowl every single year. It's what drives Alabama fans crazy about the Iron Bowl because they dread it every single year. But now the Iron Bowl is the season, right? Like the stake that those are the stakes, right? The bragging rights, the rivalry, etc. Kalen DeBoer potentially becoming the first, I think, Alabama head coach to win an Iron Bowl in his first season since Gene Stallings. So what do you think, Matt? I mean, we'll close with this, but I mean, with the Iron Bowl right now, I mean, it's a huge game in the sense that it's going to say everything that needs to be said about this season for Alabama. How do they finish? Will DeBoer understand this rivalry in a way that convinces people that, okay, is, you know, at least he won the Iron Bowl is all they're really working with right now. Do you feel good about Alabama's chances? I mean, they're 11.5-point favorites going into this game, but that doesn't mean anything with this team.
No, it feels like a coin flip game to me. If this game was being played in Jordan-Hare, I would bet all of my money on Auburn winning the game, but it's not there. And I think that removes one of the key motivators and one of the key advantages that Auburn has in this rivalry. It doesn't mean that Alabama has a similar advantage, because I don't think this fan base is super energized right now, and I don't think they're in a great place, and I don't think that the fan base will necessarily have the level of energy if this game is close going into the fourth quarter to will Alabama to a win the way that Auburn's fans do in their stadium. That's a different place, as Nick Saban said last week. It's haunted. There is some bad juju that goes on in there. Alabama doesn't have that. Okay, this is a front-running fan base, for better or worse. When things are going well for Alabama, you do not want to be the visiting team in that building. And I think getting off to a strong start is crucial for Jalen Milroe and Alabama in this game. Put Auburn in hell in this game early and take them out of it emotionally. And if you don't do that, it could get real dicey, because this Auburn team can run the ball. They're very physical. They can wear on you over the course of 4 quarters. They also have very good receivers that have started to develop over the course of the season. What they do have that works in Alabama's favor is they have a lot of inconsistency. Alabama knows a lot about that, but this is a team that has a quarterback that's capable of poorly timed, spectacularly bad decisions. And the Alabama defense has to be ready to take advantage of that when they get a chance. But Auburn's going to make plays in this game. They have good players. They have a very strong pass rush, which can be a problem for Alabama. They have a great running back, and they have an offensive line that seems to be getting more comfortable as the season goes on. So this is going to be a big challenge, and Alabama's going to need to do the thing where they bring the good version of their team to this game. Whatever that is.
You'd hope to do that every week. You're right about the strong start, right? Because I mean, they almost had a strong start in Norman. If Ryan Williams doesn't step out of bounds there and they score that touchdown, different game potentially. Like, they've got momentum. They start the game strong. They score a touchdown, which they were unable to do for the rest of the season. So you're right. You got to start strong. You got to do it as soon as you can. And, you know, our listeners are going to know this, like, as we're saying it, but we're learning it in real time. So we'll just say it. But Deontay Lawson is out for the year. He's not going to play in this game. Out for the year is 2 more games for Alabama. But they're not going to have him against Auburn, a team that can run, and that guy's a great run stopper. He did it on the play where he got injured, stood that quarterback up, made a great play around the edge, and they're not going to have him. And more importantly, calling the plays, you know, while they're on the field. So losing Deontay Lawson, huge for Alabama. But they've got a week to figure it out, and they got to finish strong. Go to a good bowl game. You know, Alabama fans aren't used to that, right? Like, They want the playoff. They want the ones that matter. And now they're just kind of hoping that, you know, they get to go to a good bowl game, play against a good team, and move on to next year. So we'll see what happens. But it was a struggle, man. And Saturday is going to be a struggle too, for obvious reasons. But it's the Iron Bowl. It's the best rivalry in college football. SEC Nation will be in town again. So we'll look forward to the atmosphere that things like that and the fans create. It's always a fun time. Like, no matter what people might say, and Alabama fans moan and groan about it, the Iron Bowl is a special rivalry, and it's a really cool atmosphere, and we're in the building for a great game. You obviously never forget it. So let's hope that, you know, it's a good one for Alabama, obviously, but for our purposes, it's just another classic. So, Matt, that'll do it, I think, for us here on Beat Everyone. But stay tuned. We've got Kaitlan Collins from CNN coming up, diehard Alabama fan, University of Alabama graduate. She has some awesome things to say about her fandom and what all is happening in the world of Alabama football. So stay tuned for Kaitlan Collins. Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. It's Iron Bowl week, and we are trying to put Oklahoma behind us. But today is very special. We've got a guest that's going to help us forget about all of it, or at least help us through it. She hosts The Source with Kaitlan Collins on CNN in primetime every weeknight at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. She's a diehard Alabama Crimson Tide fan, one of our favorites. Kaitlan Collins. Kaitlan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and a personal congratulations for myself for just showing up after Saturday's game. So, you know, I'm feeling, you know, yesterday was brutal because everyone was just like, what's going on? But I feel like we've moved to the phase of Alabama football where everyone's like, you know what? We're just accepting our destiny this season.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about coping. I mean, first thing, I mean, look, I know it for you especially, it's been a stressful time, but we're in the aftermath now. The nation is trying to heal, move forward after months of heated rhetoric, stress, and anxiety. But what has life been like for you since Alabama's third loss?
It's been an interesting few weeks, both on the work front and on my true passion, which is Alabama football. No, things have been good. It's been really busy. Obviously, the election surprised a lot of people. I think, you know, I went into that night being fully aware that anything could happen, and so since then, I mean, I've basically been in Palm Beach nonstop covering the transition, which, you know, for those of us who covered Trump in 2016, the transition was one of the kind of craziest aspects. You know, even the Trump diehards who were there will say that, because, you know, it was kind of like the wild, wild west of who's getting what job and what cabinet position. And it's been more streamlined this time in terms of, like, it's not the Trump Tower lobby where everyone's walking in, but it is still pretty similar behind the scenes from what I've been hearing of, certain camps of people, and certain people are fighting for certain jobs. And so that's really where my head has been, the last few weeks, is just who's up and who's down. And someone's offered a position, then someone tries to get him to walk it back. It's like kind of been this very, not totally chaotic, but just super newsy process. And, sometimes we hear from people who are like, who cares who he picks for this? Like, let's see what he does. But with Trump, staffing really does matter, and it can change policy, as we saw in the first term, of who's in that job. And so it is a really interesting part, because it's kind of laying the foundation for what January is going to look like.
Yeah, and Caitlin, I mean, the way you talk about it, there are parallels, right, between a president filling out his cabinet and a coach filling out his coaching staff. Like who's going to be the offensive coordinator, who's going to be the secretary of defense or the defensive coordinator. But, I do wonder, as you, the Alabama fan, right, because, I mean, Alabama does offer sort of like a respite, right, like an oasis in the desert. It's obviously noisy what you do. It's nonstop. The work pace is just second to none. What is Alabama football for you in that sense, that you can just kind of like, settle down and focus on this thing that you love so much while the rest of the world is just so insane around you?
It's honestly more stressful for me to watch an Alabama game than
So it doesn't help at all.
Especially this season, because it's like, one does get in the way of the other. Like, I was going to go to Norman. I was really excited to go. I haven't been there maybe, in 5 or 6 or maybe 8 years. And so I was excited to go back and to see Norman. I do really love it there. But honestly, like, work is so crazy that I was like, I just need a weekend to just, watch the game on my couch. Like, it really is like, you just take a moment, and, I'm at home. I had some friends come over, and it was just nice to kind of just, hang out and watch it. And like, the best part about the game is that normally when I'm on like Twitter for work or social media, it's all politics. It's all, what's going on in the news. I do follow so many Alabama sports reporters and fans that on Saturdays, it's really nice, because then when I'm on Twitter, I have so much of that in my feed. And like, the live updates are not, who's winning Arizona right now in the Electoral College. It's like, Ryan Williams, and that call was ridiculous. It's like, so it's like a totally different world. And it is really nice. And, I love when I get to go back to Tuscaloosa. My brother's in school there, so I get to hang out with him and my dad. And, having football really is something that really has been always helpful to me during my job, because it's just, it's a place of something that I'm like so excited about and so invested in, but it's just like a different level of meaning, I guess.
Well, let's keep talking football, Caitlin. I don't want to dwell on the dark side of this, but how do you cope with an Alabama loss? Like, what is your go-to? Do you shut everything off?
Well.
Yeah, do you shut everything off? You don't want to read anything? You turn, you look away from social media? Like, are you checking everything? Are you doom scrolling?
Oh, no.
What is it? How does it work?
I know some people are like, okay, turn the TV off, go pour a drink or whatever. No, I like dig in. I'm like, I'm going to read every tweet. I'm reading all the analysis on Sunday morning. I'm like talking to all my friends, like, what happened or what was that? Or, no, I dig in. Like, I lean into the loss. And I don't take loss well. I'm a really competitive person personally. I always have been. I take the losses a little bit better now. I think I'm just maturing some, but it used to hit me really hard. Like, I would personally be just devastated if we lost. And, it's not good when your emotional well-being depends on a football team, because they're humans and, they try really hard, but it doesn't always come out your way. So I've gotten a little bit better with it, but obviously, typically as an Alabama fan, you don't have to deal with loss that much. You don't really think about how you cope with loss, because it's not always an issue. And so this season it has been brutal. And I just think Saturday, that's why, it sucked, because it was like, it felt like it was taking us out of contention for the playoffs. And so I had this thought. I was like, well, I don't know what to do on like New Year's. Like, I don't like, what does your December or January look like if you're not, going to a game somewhere? And the one thing though, is this year, the playoff game or the championship game is January 20th, which I guess no one checked the calendar, because that is also the day of the presidential inauguration. And I'm like, if I had to choose, I don't know what I would do, but I guess now that is not going to be That won't be a choice that's facing me.
Yeah, not in the cards. I guess that's convenient for you then,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I mean, look, you're right. I mean, Alabama's playoff chances probably collapsed over the weekend. There's still a chance, but we talked to you earlier in the season or earlier this year, I should say, after Nick Saban retired, you said that you had a pretty emotional response to it, but you've had several months, nearly a full season to cope now. I believe you've attended at least one game in Tuscaloosa this year. What do you
Yep.
think of the Kalen DeBoer era so far?
Yeah, I went to the Georgia game. That was amazing.
Fun
Like
one?
the best game, one of the best games I've ever attended. And that, was enough to get me through. And then I also went to Camp Randall for the Wisconsin game. And that was really fun because I'd never been to Camp Randall before. And I went with James Patterson, the author, who is amazing. And his wife, Sue, is a huge Wisconsin fan. And so I had a great time with them. But I did go back and, it's still, I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing not Saban run out of that tunnel at kickoff. Like it just feels like it just is weird. And I kind of have to look for Kalen DeBoer. Like Saban, you could always just spot him on the sidelines. Kalen DeBoer, I had to my eyes are just not trained to find him immediately. And so, I'm hopeful and, hopeful about things going forward. And I just think it's a different mentality that it seems like is taking place. Because it's a different coach. And so I am hopeful. And, I've been dealing with the Saban loss better because having him on your TV every Saturday, as someone who's on TV for a living, it's really fun to just watch and listen to him at length. Like, I think that's why, people couldn't get enough of his press conferences or interviews that he did before. And he's just, he's such a stoic, and he has his advice and his, play calling that can translate to real life. I think, when he's talking about being complacent or being competitive, those are lessons that anyone watching can learn from. Me too. And so I've coped better because I still get to see him and hear from him every Saturday.
Yeah, you got to create value for yourself. You got to use the finger quotes too that Saban uses all the time.
Trust
Yeah,
the process. That's
you
what
got
I tell my team when we miss a booking or something.
Well, you got to, you just got to look for the hoodie now, Caitlin, right?
Yes.
Like an unexpected storyline for Alabama fans this season has been fashion. Perhaps, because of the win-loss record maybe, but people have really been keyed in on Kalen DeBoer's sideline attire. I mean, he wore a T-shirt one game. He wore a sleeveless hoodie over a long-sleeve shirt for Oklahoma. It's been a big conversation this year. Do you care what a coach wears when he's coaching on a game day?
I do. I don't know why, and I probably shouldn't, but I do. I think it's like the aesthetic, it's how you're presenting yourself and how you show up. And I think it matters, but I also think it's a lot of it, I think Kalen DeBoer should wear whatever he wants and whatever he thinks he's going to coach the best game in, whether that's a hoodie with the sleeves cut off, Belichick style. I don't care. As long as you're I think everyone has their own thing and their own kind of style. And Saban just had such classic style and, always in his people on A-Day would be like, is he going to wear the salmon colored blazer or the blue one? There was just those moments where you got so used to seeing something. And then when that changes, I think it disrupts people. So I think Kalen DeBoer should wear whatever he wants, except the T-shirt. The T-shirt was too much for me. So I actually do agree with people who are complaining about it.
Yeah, you're not alone. Caitlin, you've had such a unique chance to talk about your love of Alabama football on national television when, a colleague like John Berman or somebody brings it up and y'all talk football for a little bit. I'm curious though, who's another CNN college football diehard or somebody else in the political news world who might engage in a little playful trash talk, whether they're, an Alabama fan or not? They know you're an Alabama fan and you hear from them come college football season.
Well, trust me, what I've learned this season is every time we've lost, I'm like, I didn't know I had so many friends who went to Vanderbilt. Like they never mentioned they went to Vanderbilt until Vanderbilt beat Alabama. And so, a lot of, it's like people come out of the woodwork to, have a little banter back and forth after a loss. There are a ton of sports people in news actually. And it's like a fun thing to talk about. But when I used to sit in the briefing room at the White House, Steve Holland from Reuters would sit right next to me. You are assigned seats, they're predetermined, and he was sitting next to me, and he's a huge Tennessee fan. And so I showed him this Twitter account that existed until last year, where it was days since UT beat Bama, and he'd never seen it. So we're sitting there, you're waiting on the briefing for 30 minutes or an hour, And so we would just sit there and talk about football all season. And then we still text every Saturday about, what's going on with Bama or how we're looking. So yeah, it's been really fun. And then Anderson Cooper's executive producer, Charlie, is a huge Georgia fan. And so we're like, kind of like, shit talking a little, but like, we're also like, no one wants to jinx the game. And so after, Bama played, when everyone was wearing the pins that said they're eating the dogs with Trump's face on them, which was like every single person in Tuscaloosa had one on, I brought one back and put it on his desk for him. That was all my only comment after our win.
It's a one-sided rivalry. You got nothing to worry about with that guy. I mean, look, Kalen, there's been a surprising amount of overlap between Alabama football and politics in the last decade. I mean, every president since Obama welcomed an Alabama championship team to the White House. Can you sort of take us behind the scenes? Like, have you been there for when Alabama goes to the White House? Like, what is that like, especially for you?
It's so fun, and I'm obviously so biased. It's like, I pride myself on being a neutral reporter with no bias. My one bias is towards Alabama football. And so when I was there when Alabama came the last time to the White House, and I wore like a little Alabama pin on my blazer that day, and like I was on TV, and you could tell when people like were really paying attention because they would tweet at me about it. That was actually the day I met Saban. I had never met Coach Saban before, and he was there. And one of the press aides knew how important it was for me to say hi to him. And so they have these things called the sticks in front of the West Wing. It's a bunch of microphones that if lawmakers are there, whoever, they come out to say hi. And he came out to the sticks. And a source had actually told me that recruits were he was FaceTiming recruits from the Oval Office. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah. So I asked him at the sticks, I was like, did you call any recruits while you were inside? And he kind of looked at me like, how do you know that? And he said yes, and then I got to meet him. So it's really fun, though, when the teams come to the White House, because you get to see, it's not a political thing. You get to see these amazing athletes, whether it's like the Warriors or the Crimson Tide, whoever. And it's cool to see them come to the White House and get that recognition and have that moment, especially for these college players who – a lot of people never go to the White House in their lifetime. And so to be there, it's so special. And it's fun to see them get to have, to reap the rewards of a great season by getting a visit like that.
Well, you've talked to world leaders, contentious politicians, presidents, right? Who's a more intimidating interview, them or Nick Saban? If you ever interviewed Nick Saban, would you be?
Saban, no doubt.
Okay.
Because, with Saban, with the other politicians, I think the way to approach it is it's not about you. I don't have like a dog in the fight. Like I'm there to, challenge their talking points or find out news or get them to shed some light on how they feel about something, for the Israeli prime minister or former President-elect Trump. Saban, I'm emotionally invested. I really respect this guy, and I do have a dog in the fight because, But with Saban, I would actually love to interview Saban. And I think it's just because he's so wise and he has so many amazing life experiences that I would just be curious to hear him talk and like tell stories and like walk us through his thinking. It would be not, normally I'm like grilling people who are like taxpayer funded. So it'd be a little bit different, I think. But I would be more intimidated and more nervous to mess it up than I would be with anything else.
I've seen the sources guest list. Y'all could book Nick Saban, bring him on to talk NIL, and then just ask him your Alabama questions.
Consider this to be a pitch, because I have pitched his people 1 million times. I really want to interview Nick Saban. Obviously, he's busy right now, but I want to talk about NIL because I think, is the toothpaste out of the tube? What does that look like? How much it's changed the sport? These are real things. And it also translates to Capitol Hill, because I talked to a bunch of the senators who are trying to work on an NIL deal, but it's like different camps. No one seems to have coalesced around one thing. Like there's the Tuberville world. Ted Cruz has also been working on one. So it's not totally clear how that could shake out. It will be interesting to see if they come to something. Joe Manchin obviously leaving Capitol Hill is going to maybe hinder those efforts. We'll see.
Well, you mentioned Tuberville, right? The Iron Bowl is this weekend, and obviously a coach from that other school down the road is now a U.S. Senator. Is it hard to be objective, Caitlin, when covering Tommy Tuberville? We would struggle here.
No, it's not. But it is funny because he's like the only senator. Obviously senator is an esteemed title. There's only 100 of them. they all call him coach, all the other senators. They're like, oh, well, coach told me this. And you can always tell when you hear his voice, like, it sounds more like he's going to talk about like play calling or the depth chart, but then he's talking about how he's voting on like a nominee or something. He was actually one of the first guests we ever had on The Source. The night we launched, he was our second guest on the show that night. And so, yeah, it is funny. But, if you'd asked me when I was in the 6th or 7th grade and Tommy Tuberville was coaching Auburn, that one day he'd be a senator and I would be an anchor on CNN and like interviewing him, I think I wouldn't have been able to believe that at the time.
But you're from Prattville, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, is that Auburn country, Prattville? Yeah. Okay, what was it like growing up in Auburn country?
It's shifted a little, because also, that was when Alabama, that was like, it's at its worst time after the 90s. And like, we went through so many coaches in the early 2000s. And it was a brutal time if you were a Bama fan. And Prattville's 45 minutes from Auburn. My sister actually went to Auburn. And so I spent a lot of time going up there to visit her when I was still in high school. And then, so it was like that. But my dad's a Bama fan. And so when I went to Alabama, he was so happy to have like an excuse to come to Tuscaloosa. And now that my brother is there, it's been really fun because it's like, oh, I'm going to the game, but like I'm also going to see my brother and have some family time. But also we're all going to the game, and it's like honestly been a delight to be able to go back. And I'll tell you this, I have these Alabama tennis shoes, and I wore them to my workout this morning. And it's like a class, it's like 40 people. And this girl came up to me and she was like, "Are you from Alabama?" And I said, "Yeah." It was all these Alabama girls who were up here visiting. And we spent like 20 minutes talking about Alabama and football, and it was really fun.
It's out there, right? Like Alabama is global. So
all
like if
roads
somebody
lead back to Alabama.
They do. Kaitlan, you told us about a game day tradition that you've had. You've said that you get your Chick-fil-A for breakfast, you settle in, you watch College Game Day, but I want to know, like, when is Kaitlan Collins going to be the celebrity guest picker on College Game Day?
I don't know, but I'm waiting for my phone to ring because honestly, that's actually my like I hear people all the time. They're like, "Oh, you should do that." I'm like, yeah, it's like my like goal in life. Like, yes, I would like to interview a president or like host a debate, but also I want to be on College Game Day because, I just like, I watch it so much, and the program is, I think they have a genius show put together. And it's really fun to watch everyone's picks and then like listen to them talking back about it. But the good thing is Alabama has so many celebrities and big names that they always have a ton to choose from. And it's always really fun to watch. And Miss Terry was an amazing pick this year. So.
She was awesome. Incredible. I mean,
great.
Better picker than her husband, it seems.
I know. It was so fun to watch.
Well, you say you have a sister who went to Auburn. You grew up in Auburn country, but you're an Alabama fan. Your brother goes to Alabama. Do you have any Iron Bowl memories that you can like think of, like any games that you went to, or like anything stand out to you about the Iron Bowl?
Yeah, I don't go back to Auburn anymore. I used to go. I'll say I have not been to Auburn for a game since the Kick Six, and I don't plan on returning ever because I was there that night and it sucked. And yeah, I don't plan on going back. But when we had a show briefly on CNN that was for a season, Charles Barkley was on it. And so his office was like right through on the other side of this wall. And so we would always talk about it because I saw Charles Barkley in Auburn that night. I remember that being like, "Oh, this is so cool." And then like he was here. So we'd always like go back and forth, jabbing each other on football.
Barkley's the coolest. He's the one Auburn fan I think Alabama fans can like rally around.
He's amazing, and he does not get enough credit for all the things he does for Alabama, or like going back home and buying laptops for people and investing so much in the school. He does so much for Alabama. It really is. It's like, he's known for all of these things, and he's got this amazing personality, and he's so funny, but he also has such a generous heart. And it was great to get to know him better because he's such a good person. And, we both are two people who've moved out of Alabama, but still have immense Alabama pride. And so it's fun to have that. Like it really is a bond, I think, that, there's a lot of people you don't know where they're from or where they grew up. They live in New York or DC or wherever. I talk about Alabama so much that like I don't think anyone would be like, "Oh, you're from Alabama?" They're like, "Yeah, I know. We heard."
Charles is the best. We love him. I was in Jordan-Hare for the Kick Six too. That's the only game I've ever attended inside Jordan-Hare, and like you, it's probably going to be the last. The one thing that I will say is I saw the field rush from way up where I was sitting, and they were out of the stands so fast that at least it made it easy to get out of the stadium in a hurry.
You're like, I can get out, and they'll rush the field. I'll go get my car. I know. I love when Saban said that place is haunted, because he's right. Like, there's some weird juju over Jordan-Hare that, like, I don't know.
There is, but they rush the field for anything there. I mean, their fifth win, It wouldn't matter who they were going to play. They're going to rush the field. Caitlin, I mean, it's the Iron Bowl. We'll get you out of here on this, okay? Give me a prediction. What's going to happen this weekend?
I actually think after how, the one thing that has bothered me about Alabama's team this season, and I know they're going through a lot of changes, but it's been the inconsistency. It's like usually you have a pretty good feel for where the team is. But, that team that came out in LSU or in the Georgia game, was not the team we saw in Norman. And so, just as part of execution and play calling. So I'm hoping that, like, what happened in Norman, is something that fuels them for Saturday, and that we really do get to see the team that we know exists and is there. And there's so many talented people on that team. And, watching Ryan Williams is like one of my true joys in life, because he's so amazing. And so every time he gets the foot, it's just fun to watch him. And so I hope we get to see a lot of that on display on Saturday. I'm obviously hoping for a Bama win, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. Maybe we'll, I think there's stranger things have happened when it comes to playoffs, but we'll see.
Hey, you're telling me there's a chance, Caitlin. The Source with Kaitlan Collins airs weeknights, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. Kaitlan Collins, you're one of our all-time favorites. You're doing incredible work. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me, and I love coming on. I'll come on whenever.
All right, you can find Beat Everyone wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Please rate, review, subscribe. We really appreciate it. And for Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi, I'm Ben Flanagan. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.